Good.
Yep.
Well, good morning, everyone. Welcome to this meeting of Smith Falls for All for Thursday, January 11th. I'll open the meeting initially with our land acknowledgement. On January 11th, 2024, we acknowledge the sacred land on which Smith Falls is now located has been a site of human activity for over 10,000 years with rich and indigenous history. This land is the ancestral and unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe Nation. We are grateful to the Algonquin ancestors who cared for the land and water in order that we might meet here today. We're also grateful to the Algonquin people for their contribution in the making of the Rideau Canal, which runs through Smith Falls. We're mindful of broken covenants and the need to reconcile with all our relations. Together, may we care for this land and each other, drawing on the strength of our mutual history of nation building through peace and friendship, being mindful of generations to come. So I'll call the meeting to order at 9:04 a.m. Ask for a motion for approval of the agenda. Moved by Sean, seconded by Nicole. All in favor? Carried. Thank you. We have a motion for adoption of the minutes. Members who were here at the last meeting. By Janet, seconded by all in favor. Thank you. Ask for disclosure of any monetary interest. I don't believe there's any. Don't see any. Well, we're really grateful to have a delegation today with Amber Coble from the Business Development Program Officer for Valley Heartland, and Linda Alexander, who is the Recruitment and Settlement Coordinator, Rural Inclusion Pilot Project for the Lanark and Renfrew Local Immigration Partnership. So we're really excited to have you guys here. We're interested in learning a lot more about what this is all about. It really aligns, I think, with some of our priorities. So, Amber, the floor is all yours.
Well, thank you for having us this morning. As Sean mentioned, I'm the Business Development Officer for Valley Heartland Community Futures. But our office also is contracted by Lanark County to provide regional economic development services. So that's the other hat that I wear part of the day. So
we're trying on the back end here to try to get the presentation to come up.
We had some correspondence with Carrie and the team here recently, so I'm glad we were able to come over. But there's been a lot of work in the last 2 years around immigration. So some of you may be familiar with the Local Immigration Partnership. They've been around for quite some time, I think it's 2011, and they cover Lanark and Renfrew. So under the economic development hat, we've been working closely with them to start to develop more strategies around retention and recruitment. Not that they do direct service, but they're part of the building a welcoming community, offering training and education around DEI, that type of thing. But they've really been instrumental in helping guide some of the projects that we've been working on. So I'm going to give you a quick recap of kind of how we got to the pilot project that we have underway. And then I'll turn it over to Linda to kind of give you a better idea of what her role is for the next couple of years, and then what we're working on for the future. So there has been a lot, so it's going to be a quick crash course. So in October 2022, myself and the CEO of Lanark County sat on a working group across Eastern Ontario to develop a strategy for attraction and retention. And the idea behind this was, it's kind of like a make your own salad bar strategy, where we developed a suite of strategies, about 16 strategies within it. But community groups and communities themselves and economic development departments can kind of pick strategies that they can absorb into their own strategies rather than asking everyone to take on 16 new strategies. So it really was meant to cover a broad range of areas around retention and attraction, and really dig into what would those strategies look like to take kind of that workload off of other organizations so they could review this and pick things that they were able to absorb as part of their daily work plan. So that's kind of where we're at. That's okay. It kind of bled off the screen a little bit. No, you can go ahead. But there are 16 strategies, so I just kind of gave a snapshot of the ones that I felt probably resonated with this committee based on what the mandate was and what I read on the website, just to give you a snapshot. But I do encourage you, if you get a chance, to read this, because there was quite a large partnership, and it was a fairly funded project. So it happened in a very quick turnaround time. I think we developed the strategy in about 6 months. So that's kind of what led into the next project. If you could switch the slide. Immigrants Work. So Immigrants Work is actually another pilot project. There's an organization called World Education Services, and what they do in their main day-to-day work is they help with credential recognition for immigrants. but they take a fee for that, and that fee gets put into a pot of money to fund pilot projects in communities, part of their social enterprise model. So Lanark and Renfrew submitted an application, and we were one of 5 areas across Canada that were selected to do the hashtag immigrants work. So what happens is the WES team comes into our community, and they do some design thinking workshops. They meet with newcomers, they meet with businesses that are hiring newcomers, and they help co-design strategies specific to our area based on their expertise. So right now, if you could switch the slide, there's 3 phases of the project. I'm sitting on the foundational team, which we're kind of just guiding the big picture. Right now, there's been a suite of tools developed. We're engaging businesses to help test those tools to see if they're actually going to be useful in their day-to-day work. And once they've tested it and provided feedback, those tools will be refined, and then they will be made broadly available to businesses in both the counties. So it's about an 18-month project, and we're just towards the end of phase 2. And there is some Smith Falls businesses that are participating in the testing phase. In June of 2023, we put in an application to RED, recognizing that it's great to have strategies, but what we really needed was some feet on the ground. We knew that we had newcomers, we knew that businesses were hiring them, but a lot of it was we were hearing stories, and it was secondhand information. And it is a lot of work to go out and meet with everyone and make those connections and build that robust network across 2 counties. The reason why we've partnered so closely with Renfrew is the similarities in our demographics, but a lot of the funding for these types of projects, they won't look at a small community of Lanark County. You have to go larger, more regional. And Renfrew, we've partnered with quite a bit, and with the LIP being there, the labor market group covering both our counties, there's a lot of synergies, and that made a lot of sense. So Lanark County actually took the lead and applied for the application with Renfrew as a collaborator community. So it's a co-partnership. And there's 3 phases to this funding, and we have funding secured till 2026. The first is obviously Linda, and she'll talk more about her role in having boots on the ground to connect and meet with businesses and newcomers. The workforce marketing attraction plan. Renfrew did this a year before, so we built into this application one specific to Lanark County. We just went through the RFP process, so we'll have a consultant coming in, and the idea behind this is to develop messaging and test messaging and media that's going to be the best for us to use going forward, and the actual creative content that we can run a campaign to start attracting. Primarily, we're working at working age newcomers have already landed in Canada that may want to leave the cities and move to a rural community. So that's really the goal of that part of the project. And then towards the end, we'll be building in some DEI training and resources that are available that businesses can use as well, but also training of our service providers and key stakeholders as well around DEI practices. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Linda. She'll talk about really what the coordinator role is, and then maybe I'll pop back in to talk about what we have kind of going on in the background.
Sure. Is it okay if I just sit?
If you don't mind coming to the podium, because from an audio standpoint, we're not sure it reaches that far.
Does it reach us? Okay.
Thank you.
As long as I can fumble with my slides and my notes. So the project summary is the next slide, I believe. Yes. And so the key with this project is collaboration, both with local organizations, between the counties, between the municipalities, and all the organizations that would connect with newcomers and or serve newcomers or employers. So it really is a broad project, as Amber mentioned. The local immigration partnership was part of what spearheaded this project because they have been seeing the need grow over the last few years with the number of newcomers and including temporary foreign workers as well as permanent residents that are coming directly to Lanark and Renfrew counties. Next slide, please. Let's see if I can get mine down. I love these touch screens. So an overview of the project, as soon as I get there. It's to bridge the gap between local businesses and the labor market needs that we're seeing and the newcomers and talents newcomers want to come to Canada. They want to be able to work, and oftentimes they're leaving their countries where there is lack of work. And so they are professionals for the most part. There are individuals who are coming in with all skill levels, obviously, but a lot of professionals are coming and seeing Canada as a good destination that will provide a good life for themselves and their families and the work that they're looking to do. Next one. So part of the key objectives of our project, over the next 2 years, Amber kind of mentioned part of it, marketing strategy is going to be part of it, because we have to communicate that we want to be a welcoming place for newcomers. We want to let people know that we exist, because there has been some research done by Immigration Refugee Citizenship Canada that has indicated that if newcomers know about a smaller community, they're more likely to come to it, rather than just landing in the larger centers and staying there. So oftentimes these individuals worked and lived in smaller communities, so that's where they want to be able to raise their families and not in the bigger centers. The DEI training that was mentioned, that kind of overlaps with some of the work that our local immigration partnership does. So we're going to work in collaboration so that we're not duplicating resources, that we're going to build the resource so that beyond this project, which ends in 2026, there will be a continuation of that resource. And Amber alluded to it, we're hoping to have something that will be digital based so that anybody can implement it in their organization. I do and have begun to work with local businesses to talk to them about their staffing needs. I've been connecting to a variety of businesses, a couple in Renfrew County and a few in Lanark County and Perth and the area, and asking them about what their needs are, and particularly ones that have already started to explore bringing in temporary foreign workers because they cannot fill the positions. And so I'm working with them to say, what are you missing? What's needed? And we're meeting with the newcomers that they brought in and asking them the same question. What do you need? What is missing? And oftentimes there's issues around language. There's sometimes paperwork that the employers aren't prepared to navigate or don't have the skill set to navigate, but the newcomer needs to in order to move along the process of immigration. And so I actually have a background in working in settlement services and employment services. And so I'm using some of that connections and networks to kind of bring these resources into our area. We are going to have to look at developing and implementing some recruitment strategies. So right now I'm working closely with Lanark Lodge, who has looked at bringing in temporary foreign workers, skilled temporary foreign workers. And I'm working with that committee with that process with the idea that let's replicate that with other businesses. Let's take what we've learned with that model and bring it into other situations. And also working with some frontline small businesses that I've been working with to say, what was your process? What would have been helpful to have in your kind of system that you've done? So I'd like to develop strategies because I'm one person, 2 big counties. So collaboration is important. But if we can get strategies that'll work for a small business, strategies that'll work for a larger organization or a larger business, then let's bring those resources together and share them. And Amber has been looking at bringing in some resources around information around technical pieces of doing just that in terms of what are the things that are required for a business to bring in a temporary foreign worker. Identifying jobs that would make a good match for newcomers. Right now I'm working with several newcomers, not a lot. I started in October and I started working with about a half dozen businesses and about a dozen newcomers. And I'm trying to figure out what their needs are. So where are the matches for their skill sets? I am struggling with some that are facing issues around their credentials not being accepted in Canada. That the requirement is you have to have a Canadian designation and those kinds of things. So I'm trying to navigate around that. I know there are businesses and organizations out there that will hire with the qualifications. So I'm hoping that we can find those matches, and then it'll maybe give them an opportunity to update their skills while they're working. I'm also trying to connect them to the programs that are important. We have PSW programs that are coming in through the school board, and I'm trying to connect some of our newcomers who aren't qualified to get into those PSW programs and get into that accelerated program and allow them to get that credential. The government has made some changes to temporary foreign workers to allow them to participate in that kind of training. And that's brand new. Like that only happened about 6 months ago. So those are really good things that are progressing. Amber already talked about the marketing strategy, so I'm not going to go into that in too much detail. and also the DEI training. We also want to set up some best practices for working with newcomers, so the employers have an idea of what else is needed when you're onboarding a newcomer that you may not think about when you're onboarding a regular staff person. And so we're going to try to develop some best practices for working with newcomers from the experiences of the employers that are currently working with them and the newcomers that are here. Next slide. See if I can get to it. Which one is it? Okay, yeah. So attraction and retention is also a part of it. And that's already talked about, developing strategies based on what the employer is looking for. But part of the retention piece for newcomers, and this is from experience with other communities, is we also have to create a welcoming space in the community for newcomers, so that there is an opportunity to connect with people who live here, to get to know them, and vice versa. Maybe some cultural exchanges. We've often found that potlucks with everybody bringing their traditional dishes into an informal meeting is kind of a nice way for people to get to know each other. Libraries are a great resource for that in terms of connecting individuals through activities. And so we are looking for ways of creating that welcoming space for newcomers so that they feel comfortable engaging, and that our residents feel comfortable engaging with someone who maybe has a slightly different accent or different tastes of food or all those kinds of things that until we get to know the human being, sometimes we kind of hesitate because I might say something wrong or I might say something that will offend them. And so I think bridging or building those connections is really important. Yeah, and so again, supporting welcoming community and welcoming workplace, that's part of the diversity, equity, and inclusion training, is to be welcoming for everyone. And if we start with inclusion, you can't go wrong. So we're going to be facilitating some of that in our training. The next slide, please. Okay, I've already talked about this. Collaboration is really important. I have already started meeting with local service organizations, all the employment centers. I've been trying to make a personal contact with, because that's my background. And so I know the language, I know what they're going through. I was a manager going through some of the transitions that they're seeing. And also the fact that we are not going to duplicate what they're doing. My goal is to bring a newcomer who's eligible for service to them, to have them work with that client and to stay connected with the client to make sure that their needs are being met. So that's important. We're also going to be connecting, I'm also going to be connecting with the pre-arrivals. So there are organizations that specifically target internationally to bring people into our communities. I want to make sure the rural communities like ours are at those events so that we have the opportunity and the employers have the opportunity to recruit individuals from those processes. One of the advantages is some of the paperwork's already done at the pre-arrival services. They already have their permanent resident status, which is a huge step to getting into Canada. And the next part is for the employer to provide that piece in terms of the employment offer. And so getting them to connect virtually at those kinds of events, having specific employers, we will do better at recruitment and make better fits for those kinds of things. Regional immigrant and settlement services, again, there are, as Amber mentioned, there are people out in the city centers around us that have an excess of newcomers. And I think we should try to get some of those recruited to our area. I'm thinking in particular of Cornwall, that ended up getting a whole bunch of the refugees that came through Montreal that are now there and trying to settle and struggling with settling. And I think the community is overwhelmed. So is there a way for us to connect with those centers to say, these are the job openings we have. Do you have the skill set? Please think about coming to our community, or a way of recruiting them to come to our community. Ottawa, it's the same thing. I have met with one newcomer who said they landed in Ottawa, they liked it, it was great, but then when they ended up moving to this area, they found it much more relaxing and much better for them and a better fit for them. So I think we need to start looking at those kinds of things on a regional basis, and that's where the Eastern Ontario immigration strategy is a key factor, and our local immigration partnership is that catalyst with those kinds of activities and events. Next one. January 2024. So every 5 years at this point has been the system. Immigration, Refugee, and Citizenship Canada puts in a call for proposal for settlement and language services. And their call for proposals came in beginning of December, late November, and the deadline is the end of January. So we're currently in the process of putting in an application to cover Lanark and Renfrew counties for settlement services, to provide those soft skills, soft connections, community connections that employers don't have the time to do. Ideally, we want to bring the newcomers to the area, they work, the employers help them work, and settlement services can help them navigate everything else, like banking systems, getting their children into the schools, any number of things. The settlement services have specific program components, and the program components are listed on there. It starts with an intake or a needs assessment, just like any good process should, talking to the person, asking them what their needs are, asking what their strengths are and their goals, and then helping them achieve those goals in the community. Information and orientation sessions are things that we take for granted. The Canadian banking system. How do you work the debit machines if you don't have a debit machine in the country you've come from? All of those kinds of things that we may take for granted in the day-to-day. The grocery stores, the navigating the libraries, how do you get it registered? How do you get your kids registered in schools? All of those kinds of things. Plus general information about municipal government, federal government, provincial government, how the systems work. So part of that information and orientation is giving them a sense of what it's like to live in Canada. The language training is also a component, and I think that's often one of the top 3 things newcomers want. They want a job, they want support with language training, and they typically want to help with housing or settling their kids into school. All those 3 kind of come together in one bundle. The language services are specific to newcomers in IRCC funding. There's specific eligibility. And so that will allow them to build their language skills to reach the level where they can apply for citizenship, because in Canada you have to have a certain level of English or French in order to apply for citizenship. So language training helps them build those skills. Building community connections is kind of a foundation, and again, I already talked about that. Creating events where people get to meet each other in the community, get to know the community, get to know, practice their language skills in an informal way in conversation kinds of circles. Also building a connection with the Indigenous community. That is a priority that IRCC has put in there, as well as some of the diversity, equity, and inclusion kinds of priorities. And supports for facing barriers. Oftentimes something can trip a person up in their process of applying for something because they don't have a document from their home country translated. Settlement services will help with that. Same with oral translation at a meeting before their language skills are built up. We will have access to translators. Ideally, staff speak multiple languages, but if they don't, there is a network where we can call and get that translation done. As well as building a core group of volunteers. Settlement workers in the schools specifically work with the youth. We want to make sure they're integrated. We want to build relationships with the police so that in their country of origin, they may not have had a very good relationship with police. And where I was working in Owen Sound, we had our community services officer in with our groups fairly regularly to kind of demystify that potential conflict, and it worked out really beautifully. So I think that's, oh no, I've gotten off here. My computer times out when I don't move it.
If I ask a quick question?
Sure.
I'm loving the fact that you're using the language newcomer. I think that that's incredibly important. My question is, what's involved in providing cultural safety, which is transferable, especially to newcomers who may have come from countries where human rights are not what we have? Mm-hmm. And how are we making sure that everybody basically becomes an ambassador, because that's what we need to do, I think, to create welcoming. Mm-hmm. But language is really crucial to how we see people in, I think, many areas. So is the material going to be translated to using just newcomer versus immigrant and things like that?
It's tricky because it's funny how, I like using the term newcomer, but it's funny where people who are newcomers say They will identify with immigrant services versus settlement services. And so wording is very important, but it can be tricky on both sides of it, from a newcomer perspective as well as a community member perspective. But I think part of that is those community connections, is building a safe environment for people to come, inviting a whole group of newcomers into your meeting to get to know who is representing the community and who is looking out for the entire community and how municipal government works. They're interested in finding out because this is all new to them. And so I think that part has, community connections are very generic and it can be developed into whatever it will work. And we actually work very closely with sponsor families and with community organizations on those community connections, just because of that. Yep.
Just on the notion of what newcomer means. So I moved to Canada in 2020, and that time was particularly interesting because a lot of services were frozen. Are you looking backwards for people who may have been caught in that period where a lot of services were unavailable? I had to struggle a lot with myself. Fortunately, my wife's Canadian, so knew a lot of the basics about stuff. But are you looking backwards? Are you?
Well, the eligibility criteria is actually quite broad.
Okay.
That newcomers by IRCC standards is anybody that's not a Canadian citizen, that they're a permanent resident or a refugee or in process of applying for their permanent residency.
Okay.
So we used to have this in forms. Sometimes you have to say 5 years within the last 5 years, but IRCC is really kind of vague on that because there are a lot of people who've been living here for 10 years that are still PR that might still need some supports.
I was just thinking that because I'm because of how frozen and then backlogged a lot of services are. I'm still thinking I'm actually doing my credentials through WES right now.
Excellent.
Because I was hired during a lot of just chaos, right? And then it's only taken until now for HR to be like, wait a minute, can we look at your credentials? I'm like, yeah, here you go. It's like, yeah, you need those translated to Canadian. So there's lots of people like me that have been here for a little while and have some things sorted out. I'm not looking forward to tax season because I'm like, ooh, to wrap my head around it is a bit difficult. So I think it's like when we think about this and use the word newcomer, it can be like, oh, you're just like fresh off the boat, like let's go. But there are people like myself who've been here for a bit, but may still need some assistance.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, I'm just wanted to check because I'm glad that's the case because I'm like,
no, absolutely. And even referral to services such as WES, assisting with credential, all of those things would be a settlement worker's role to kind of bridge those gaps. It doesn't mean they hold your hand only as much as you need, right? Some people need a lot. Some people just need a few directions and then come back when you've done that and come back and check in.
Exactly the scenario describing is where like the retention piece comes in. Is if someone's come to our community and they're still struggling, we don't want them to leave after 5 years if they're. And what really has been the push for the IRC application is we've never had formal settlement services in the county. There's been like little bits and pieces of things kind of being done, but that's why we knew going into the RED pilot project with Linda, like that was an issue. It had been an issue for quite some time, but the more we connect with newcomers, the more we connect with businesses, we're understanding like how much that gap is really hurting attraction and retention of newcomers. And that's what's really pushed us towards this. And like, besides the fact that the numbers are increasing and we're really doing a deep dive into the data, but Linda having the background she has, immigration is not typically a skill set of economic development. Her knowledge is definitely filling in. It's such a complicated process. There's so many things that you need to be aware of and understand. And her having an inner working, like understanding the inner workings has been like a huge benefit to the counties because now we really understand the gaps like from a whole other perspective and where we can like maybe go for funding to solve some of those or bringing in the right partners.
Ever do you
Sorry, Chris, sorry for a moment. I'm just going to actually if we hold our questions till the finish of the presentation, then we'll come back. I think everyone's anxious to get some questions in, but we'll have you first.
So I think I've done everything on that slide.
Yeah, I think that might have been our last slide.
No,
great, yes.
So I think I've already mentioned this about the pre-arrivals. And so the pre-arrivals are going to be a focus because we want to get our share of newcomers to our areas. And so we have put that into our settlement service proposal that we want to have that staff person to help navigate that system.
Yeah, so the timelines, we won't know for quite some time. I think at least 6 months if there are proposals even going to be considered, and then there's a negotiation period. So should we be funded, we wouldn't be looking until 2026.
2025.
2025.
April 2025 is when it starts. The deadline, yes.
And
No,
it's a 5-year funded
which is nice.
commitment, which is excellent. But in the meantime, like we've always kind of said, like settlement services would absolutely solve a lot of the issues we've identified. In the meantime, once the application's in and there's not much more we can do, but cross our fingers, the role of the RED project is to kind of come up with plan B. If we weren't to get settlement services, what could we realistically put in place to address some of these challenges that we're facing? So if we don't get another call for applications for another 5 years for IRCC, we can start making some progress. Like, it's great to have strategies. It's great to have, lofty goals, but things that we can actually put our hands on and solve some of these problems realistically in that time frame. So I think that's,
Yep.
yeah.
That's- I think
So
the
like I
last
said,
one's
there's
just
been a
a
lot
comment.
happening recently with like the immigration piece.
Well, thanks, Amber and Linda, and we're grateful you're here today. I think it aligns with our broader work we do here, but very specifically with a subcommittee we have that's focused on sort of allyship, ambassadorship, trying to welcome and accommodate and attract newcomers to our community. So your presentation has been very valuable, and I think there's some great synergies here, but I know there's a lot of questions, so I'll go with Chris first.
Yes, well, we've known over the years that these types of things have been really growing. 4 years ago when I first started to work, I was working with doctors and other professionals of that level who were newcomers. Now, I think it's so crucial because, again, with the understanding of the importance of creating cultural safety, not only for Indigenous persons, but for newcomers, because there are so many issues coming. I'm wondering how that's being built into the foundation so that if they want to stay, the staying will be based on feeling safe and welcomed, as you said. And how do we educate our members in the community? Mostly we are a welcoming community, to be able to be aware that there could be a lot of factors that will account for behavior and cultural ways that are not meant as offense. Because when some Ukrainian families were coming over, in Ottawa in particular, there was a misunderstanding. And how do we avoid that misunderstanding from the start, where this was just being culturally appropriate for the culture and the language of the newcomer? And I think that's a crucial piece. So I'm wondering if that's being included in this particular program.
Absolutely. And I think, but it can't all be done by staff. And then that's where the community-based committees, I know in a small community that I really think is a model for us, they have a meeting once a month to welcome all the newcomers. So anybody that's a newcomer comes to that meeting. Anybody that's been there for a while that's a newcomer comes to that meeting. Community members come to that meeting. And it's in a community space so that they get to know the community space, but they also get to hear from locals and from experience, and it helps build that connection. And having it on a regular basis is what makes a difference.
And within terms of the IRC application, I mean, there's definitely boxes we have to fit into, and not enough word count, in my opinion.
Right.
But there's some areas where we've been able to leave it somewhat broad, and mostly in correct me if I'm totally off base, but community connections, because it gives us time. Like I said, as Linda's here and we're learning more about who's in the community and what's being done and what are some of the challenges or, unfortunate situations that are arising that we need to address, it gives us time to, like, in the background formulate, like, how could we, because, I mean, coming up with some of these strategies in a month where you're trying to pull all the data and make your case to get the funding is not realistic. We're going to run into things in the next, few months that we're like, this would be a great thing that would fit in our community connection. So leaving it broad enough that we have a little wiggle room should we get the funding that we can build in some other.
Well, I really appreciate it. And I think your monthly community meetings in a safe place really would be a good way for them to slowly build connections within the community that are not frightening because of any trauma or past experience that was not positive and not the same, like policing, for example. where, you know, in some cases, if you saw the police, that meant you were at risk. Here, that's not the same experience based on the ongoing education of anti-racism and things like that we have to continue with.
Perhaps you could allude to just like the women and violence in that section, like the
Oh, yes.
mental health support.
So in the application, they've also asked us to address gender-based
And they call it gender-based analysis.
analysis plus. And so part of that is how in our application are we going to be conscious of being trauma-informed service delivery, having trauma-informed service delivery. So part of the staff training commitment for the first while they're onboarding is the trauma-informed one, the gender-based violence information, LGBTQ plus training, all of that, because it's important that staff have that broad cross-section of training, but I also think some of the DEI training could be community-based. And is there a way of kind of getting into different organizations and providing that simple, straightforward training that opens the conversation so that people become aware of their unconscious bias? We all have it on various things, whether it's about food or anything else, right?
Thank you very
Yeah.
much.
Thank you. Other questions?
Question.
So Sherry first and then Nicole.
Hi, I just want to say this has really been really helpful, and I really appreciate this presentation. And I probably will be in touch with you. So I'm the manager of primary care at Rideau Community Health Services. So it's a local community clinic offering primary care and a bunch of services, an umbrella of services such as social work, community health workers. We've got dietitians. We help people with their diabetes. And we did bring on a lot of the Ukraine families, for instance. They found that we do offer, I feel, a very welcoming space there. And we literally had some people just come in to the clinic. We didn't know who they were, and that was okay. And we brought them in, we sat them down, we figured out what they needed. And they've done very well. And at first, there was a lot of phone calls, they needed a lot of support, and a lot of information, and now that's kind of all settled. So I'm assuming no news is good news, I'm hoping. One question that comes to mind, now with the Ukrainian families, I believe they were supported to find housing. So that's the first thing I think of when there's a couple of things, housing and mental health supports, because we struggle so much in these communities already. What are the thoughts there and how? Yeah.
Absolutely. Those two things have to be factored into any kind of strategy for bringing in newcomers. Lanark Lodge, as an example, is looking at converting the space that they have in the lodge where the Alzheimer's Society is right now. When you do bring in a temporary foreign worker, you have to provide accommodation for a minimum of 4 weeks. That's part of your commitment. And then if you want to retain them, there has to be a strategy to get them into housing. And part of that commitment it's 2 to 4 weeks, depending on the consultants that you're working with. But that kind of makes sense. If you're a stranger in a strange land, the last thing you want to worry about when you're starting your job next week is, where am I going to live and how do I navigate everything? So there are some things that employers have to look at and try to be creative in finding those strategies. And it has to be, I think we have to be creative because we don't have buildings coming up tomorrow with new housing. So what do we already have in the community that, whether it's a bylaw change or whether bylaws already exist, how do we accommodate the Ukrainians, newcomers? How do we accommodate the students in Perth? Are there strategies already in place that we can implement with newcomers to provide them with some short-term or longer-term solutions? One of our areas, the community I was working in, they brought in a bunch of nurses from the Philippines, and the facility was actually transitioning to a new facility, so they used the old facility to house as staff housing. It's kind of like the old nurses' residence, right? Nursing graduates came and they had a residence right beside the hospital, right? If you have been around for that long.
I think the other key piece with that is it's affordability too, right? It's
Absolutely.
not just finding them a place, it's that affordability. And we already see that. We see a lot of that at the clinic, food security issues and people with, at risk of losing their housing or they don't have housing. So, yeah.
That's a huge one for sure.
We were very acutely aware of the housing problem when going into this project. It was obviously something we discussed at County Council before we went in for the RED project. It's like, well, you know, is this going to do more harm and good? And the thought being that, like, if we don't start building strategies now, then we're already 3 years behind. And obviously, there's federal and provincial and municipal strategies happening around housing. But having Linda based with us at the business center is very beneficial because we're starting to have some of those conversations with businesses. I mean, no one's really coming to us right now for loans. So it's been a lot of counseling about like, what are some creative strategies and like, is there a business case for you? Does it make sense for you to offer accommodation? What would that look like? Do you need help understanding your cash flow and building that in? So it's really a holistic approach because it's not going to be like a one size fits all solution for every business. Offering housing might be feasible for a large manufacturing company. It might not be feasible for a small downtown business, but can we start building better connections with realtors? And can we have more of a referral network? And being on, I know Linda's part of like all the housing Facebook groups and just keeping our ear to the ground in that way. So it definitely,
It's an issue.
obviously a concern.
Well, just as Bill and Sherry's for a moment, the Smith Falls Welcomes Ukraine committee. It was a grassroots committee which really, and it did fundraising and ensured that anybody who landed here had a place to live. And in many cases, I think what we're talking about here is something, maybe another reflection of that, or that could accommodate, of course, anybody from any culture, any part of the world. I think because in that situation, simply was notification of the community, and the community started to respond saying, well, I've got a room, I'll take somebody, and I've got an apartment in my house, I will take somebody in. So I think a lot of it's communication and marketing and promotion that can find some spots maybe that are not fully utilized today. But anyway, so we got a lot of questions. Nicole's next, and then Sean.
And then I would like to say something.
I do have to run out. I have a group of people coming in to be trained today, so I will stick around for the last question, one more question before I'm sorry, I do have to run out for.
I can stay.
Okay.
Linda's good.
Awesome. Thank you for your discussion today. When looking at Lanark County as a whole, I know that it can be very wide and vast in the needs that it faces. As independent needs are found, i.e. Housing in Smith Falls or job recruitment in Carleton Place, will those independent needs be shared with the specific municipalities to target? So if you find that Smith Falls has gaps, will that be shared with us?
So because this is kind of economic development's kind of a big player in this project, we host an economic development alliance. So that's something where like quarterly all the active staff, and if there's not an active staff, because some of our smaller municipalities don't, they have a clerk or whoever, we all meet and we discuss what are the challenges and opportunities, and we share that type of information. As stuff's kind of coming a little more fast and furious with what we're learning, that's probably something like I will take the lead on, being like, we're hearing this specifically in Carleton Place, you know, connecting with the right people to help address those issues. I'm in constant contact with Julia here. So like that information sharing piece, it's like by no means we're like hoarding what we're hearing, especially when it's like very specific community things. I'm always looking at things from the regional level. What can we offer regionally that helps everybody? But if there's something that needs to be addressed specifically lower tier, like here's what we're hearing. If there's a way we can help, you know, solve this, let us know. But like you need to be aware of this. So absolutely, we want to make sure our partners are well informed because Linda's turning up things that like we didn't know we were going to find. So
Thank you.
Sean?
Are you seeing more successes in certain labor bases to attract people? Because I know you hear a lot about credentialed workers coming over, that their documents just aren't accepted, and they've already uprooted their family and landed here, and the challenges to find quality employment or equal type employment is a struggle, right? So are you seeing successes in different fields or?
So right now, I've only been working with a handful of employers that have been bringing people across, but that is an issue with people who come here probably more as refugees.
Okay.
Although I do have a colleague from my former work who came here because biology was the express entry requirement. And so she had a biology degree. She came over here. There were nobody hiring biologists. They were like not knowing sound anyway. And so their decision to move, and her husband was trained as a lawyer in the country of origin. He had to actually go back to school to get his law degree in Canada. So there are some professions that require that re-education or some sort of thing to do that. But in the pre-arrivals program, in some of the express entry ones, the credentials are already being accepted. And so that to me is a better way to go, because they're coming here based on the fact that those skilled trade credentials are already accepted. But you're right, it's still an issue for newcomers. I'm dealing with that one who has a nurse's aid certificate that is not being recognized. Lovely individual, and if I had an elderly parent or somebody who is sick, I would want her to take care of them, because she has absolutely the right compassion, the right approach, and the care. So yes, that's still an issue. That's where West can come in, or some of the referrals. We still have to resolve those issues for doctors, right?
I'd also,
Some of those.
I'll just add to, that's part of like the marketing just for Lanark County, is we have a little more control of the narrative that we can start talking about, like what are the in-demand jobs here. I mean, when the province and the feds are recruiting people over, it's often done at like a very like high level industry way of doing it and promoting things. So depending on where someone lands, it might not be the best match. But I mean, we can't necessarily influence that other than maybe, you know, offer some suggestions. But for local recruitment, at the very least, through the marketing plan, we can be a little more targeted with what jobs are actually here that we can accommodate and what skill sets we're looking for. And that's part of like, we understand the data and we get lots of information from Stats Canada, the labor market group, but the one-on-one conversations, there's often stuff that doesn't get captured when you're meeting with businesses about what their real skill set needs and what they're looking for to fill some of their labor shortages. So that anecdotal information and that firsthand information that Linda's able to gather helps us cater those messages a little bit better and understand really boots on the ground what are some of the things that we need to fill.
And to provide realistic expectations for the newcomer. So if they're coming across as an internationally trained nurse, you're going to land and you can work as a PSW, and we will connect you to the organization that helps you get your nursing credentials. But it'll take a year, right? There are organizations that can do that.
On that note, because I know it's like my one thing that I'm always complaining about, but like in our marketing, being very honest about what a rural community offers. Like often we always hear, well, transportation's a barrier. Yes. Are we likely to solve transportation and have light rail in Lanark County in the next 5 years? That's not going to happen. So what we need to be doing in our marketing is making it very clear, like when you live in a rural community, yeah, you give up some of those conveniences, but we can help you secure your license. You can get a car. It offers independence. It's a lifestyle that you have to be willing to, that you're interested in having. And so I think controlling the narrative and being very honest about what we have to offer in terms of quality of life, the realities of living in a rural community, and just, you know, all the benefits of living here, that needs to be part of our messaging rather than being like, please come. Oh yeah, by the way, we don't have buses. I mean, that's not helping anybody.
So with those challenges, or is it like acutely aware that transportation costs of everything have gone up, right? I mean, even food costs have gone up because of transportation costs. So if somebody needs to get a car and get insurance and get gas and what have you, like, is there assistance with those types of things, or is that here's your job and we'll steer you in the right direction? But
yeah, and it's more about helping them navigate. So first of all, the issue around driver's licenses, I've learned a lot about that. and just acquiring a driver's license in Ontario can take some time. So setting those realities for the newcomer is important. So when you arrive, you have to be able to walk or get to work from where you're going to live. So some of those things have to be very practical at the beginning until they've established, and then they can go on to getting some of those independent things.
And that's a bit of piece, like a role the local immigration partnership plays, is like their website is meant to like break down like kind of what is the cost of living in a rural community and what are the challenges you'll face, what are the things you're going to have to put in place. Like that's part of what they've always done. It's part of what, you know, I mean, Settlement kind of has on their website. I think it's just being very upfront and transparent about those realities, because you want to set people up for success, not failure. And like knowing that ahead of time I mean, and you could make that argument that students coming out of school have to have that reality check as well, right? Like things cost money, gas is expensive, but now when you're navigating it in a whole new country, there's an added level of complexity there.
And Sean, I think we have an opportunity to discuss that in our first priority item, like sort of setting our vision, our strategic priorities, and maybe again, if we're going to decide we need a community to support that. I know with the Smith Falls Welcome to Ukraine group, there's volunteer drivers, at least until people got landed and established. And if they had to go here or there's someone who's going to be there to help them. So there may be gaps, solutions to fill the gaps that are become
I
evident.
think too, as you referred to, that there will be companies who need to provide housing as well as part of the criteria. We, in the past, I was part of 50,000 Women who told the federal government this over 20 years ago. We have sometimes fallen short in our community, where I brought up this as well before Tweed came here, that we need to make sure that the persons who are providing the employment are willing to meet all of the needs. If we're going to have a welcoming community, it means that the people who are here who are at risk also have to have secure housing as well as the newcomers who come in. Otherwise, you deal with, when you talk about biases, sort of old school sometimes bigoted thinking. And the only way that can be avoided is by addressing all of the needs of this community. And that means not saying federal, provincial, municipal. It means we have to be pioneers as well, because the reason we're in the housing crisis we're in is because 20 years ago, when CHIMS should have been started then, they weren't. And we don't want to bring newcomers here who are going to fail because of lack of basic needs. And I hear you referring to that when you say if it's a larger company or the old days, nursing residents used to be a part of what was attached with training. We need to start looking at that again.
And just to qualify, in terms of newcomers and employers, the employers, if they're bringing in temporary foreign workers, you have to cover the cost for the first few weeks because you're obviously not going to get paid right away. But then after that, the person can pay rent. So it's not like it's not without their own accountability, right? It's just helping them get settled in that short term, but having access to housing.
Right, if you have no housing, you can't pay rent, and that's a large part of the difficulty, or not secure housing.
Before this project, we did a series of roundtables with employers, and I think we interviewed over 200, and we had like very in-depth conversations. And what kept coming up was like obviously recruitment and retention of employees. And there was a consensus for most businesses that like you can't just offer benefits and great time off anymore. That's not enough. And when you just talk about like, oh, we're inclusive, et cetera, that's great to say, but like you have to really walk the walk. And part of that is, seeing businesses offer mom shifts, seeing that like, you know what, if we're going to have a competitive advantage and recruit people and stay viable and be able to grow our business, we're going to have to maybe look at offering things like transportation or some sort of accommodation or being more flexible with hours or whatever it takes to keep staff, because the workforce is tightening and everyone's competing for a very limited pool of people. So I think the businesses that are willing to go that extra mile and adapt some of these strategies are going to be the ones that are successful in the years to come. So that's just kind of information that we're hearing, but I think businesses are attuned to that, but the labor market issues have really woken them up to maybe, we're going to have to start thinking outside of the box of traditional business models.
Thank you. Further questions? I just had a couple myself. I guess one, I suppose the strategies for direct immigrants versus second stage immigrants have to be different too, because the needs of someone who's coming in as a refugee or direct immigrant are so much higher, especially the language barrier. And we've seen that with some of the Ukrainians where they're not able yet to work in their field because of like a lack of language training. So that will be something to be embedded, I guess, in the programs that are offered.
There are like 9 ways immigrants can come to Canada. So the pre-arrivals is really a net. The ones that are coming for specific professional jobs have to have a language level requirement met before they're granted permanent residency. So that's one of the components, but other people coming over, you're right, may not have the language skills to be able to work in their work environments. The good thing about the internet is there are organizations that are online where they can practice their English skills. And our idea of language training, we are going to do it online because I know that works in rural areas. You have to get past the technology piece, but it works for shifts. People at home can do classes in the evening, and they want to do classes every day. The newcomers that I've worked with, they want to learn English and practice their skills every day because they're determined to kind of bring their skills up. So yes, it's a complex system, and depending on how they get here will depend on a whole variety of things. And you're right, supports have to be different.
Well, your comment to start, I think on your slides was like making sure the supports are available to integrate and stay and to thrive, right? And that's where I see each community, especially the urban communities, needing to create that group that can support newcomers when they arrive here. And I always go back to Smith Falls Walk with the Ukraine group because it worked. It did some fundraising, it recruited some volunteers, it found housing, helped find employment, helped connect them to community health services. So it's having the ability to make sure people land safely in our community, and on an ongoing basis, they know who to turn to should they have a need for something. So we'll discuss that further. But is that so? Do you see those types of committees or groups around Lanark Renfrew and being integrated into what you were doing or collaborating with?
I think whether we get the IRCC funding or not, we need those kinds of committees in order to be successful, because it has to be at the community level, because you know your community, you know how to where to get to things, right? And plus the connection is going to be there with their neighbors, and they're going to be living here. So you're absolutely right. Whether it's IRCC funding or whether it's this project, we will be looking for those committees, those organizations, those groups to create that welcoming space. Absolutely.
And the settlement services, there's such a technical element that has to be addressed with language training, with, support with paperwork and all those things, that there's not really a capacity in formal settlement to, be out offering all these groups, right? So I think that grassroots plus the technical element makes for a very holistic approach, and you get more buy-in, right? Because honestly, retention is a two-way street, right? You want them to, come to Smith Falls and love it and love Canada, but you also want your residents to understand where they're coming from and have respect for that. So that really, you can't force that. That's something that happens at a community level. And I think that's probably the best approach, is to have the technical piece that we can get funded, and those things that really do require a very specific skill set, and then have the community element.
Thank you. Anything further before we simply say thank you very much? I think this is the start of a conversation, and I think a fair amount of work we could do together. And we look forward to developing that relationship and engaging as needed, and looking to you for mentorship and guidance as we move forward. So I think we'll discuss this as a group further within our agenda. So again, thanks for being here today.
Well, thank you. You gave us an exceptional amount of time to talk. So.
We know you like to talk, Amber.
It was great to see everyone. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So moving ahead with our agenda, and essentially we've had this on the agenda a few times: strategic priorities and visioning, and really what does this group represent? And obviously we have, I think, a very broad approach. We say Smith Falls for all. We want to make sure we are a community that works for everybody, and that means people living with disabilities, people living in poverty, newcomers coming into our community, people representing various minority groups. So we guess at the same time, the broader it is, the less focus we have on the areas which may be the most important. So I think as a group, we need to sort of just chart our path forward. And so I think what we've seen today is something we need to discuss further, but I have a broader visioning discussion as well. We'll just open it up for the thoughts on how broad our approach should be, how targeted or narrow approach should be. We have limited resources, so where do we commit our energy?
I've been giving a lot of thought to the idea of ambassadorship and using some of those who are presenting to become possible ambassador partners with us, because they bring so many skills and so much knowledge that some of us cannot have that knowledge, and it would then spring out into further So for example, we had Dion who offered to come and do more, teachings. We've had Amber and Linda now who know a great deal more about newcomers. I think that we have a real wealth of how we can network, and so that we can be ambassadors. Maybe, in my opinion, we're required to be ambassadors or allies for sure, and that then we can be branching out and being sort of an example to other communities and municipalities. That's my thoughts.
Thank you, Chris. The other way to approach it, of course, is to basically SWOT analysis, where we take what are the strengths of our community, and that's what we need.
Sean, I'm having a problem hearing you.
Oh, sorry, a bit of a SWOT analysis. What are the strengths of our community? So when we're promoting Smith Falls to the broader world, to both potentially from refugees to first stage immigrants to second stage immigrants, what are the assets we have in our community? What are the pluses that make this a great place to land and settle? So I don't think we need to break those down necessarily, but we can all put some thought into what are the things that Smith Falls stands for and how do we communicate that? So it's not just, so communication strategy and marketing strategy is part of what we're doing to help promote Smith Falls to the broader world. And then the weakness side of it, what are the challenges in the community? Where are the gaps? And we've talked about a little bit today, transportation being a gap, housing being a gap. Even for some of the newcomers that come in recent years, that cultural gap where they've been here and they're a little bit on an island and don't have the supports for their own culture. That creates some barriers and some challenges, especially from a language standpoint, or that lack of affordability for a house, and not able to even stay in our community maybe because of the cost of housing, or they can't find something. So I think we need to go through that. What are those gaps? Chris?
Also, we have a wonderful foundation that was created when we welcomed newcomers from Ukraine. Why can we not now catapult ourselves or go from that foundation and spread it out? Because I believe that this would be a way of us creating some measures that will make us able to provide secure housing for all those in our community and be an example of inclusion. And my last part is, I still do not believe we can forget about anti-racism and trauma-informed approaches. That's crucial, I think, if we're going to be successful.
Sean?
So I was just going to echo some of what Christine just said, Chris just said, sorry, about we've already put a lot of work into the Ukrainian welcoming portion of it all. So instead of having to reduplicate work and resources, just remodel it a little bit and make it broader. But I think in terms of welcoming newcomers and immigrants, I think one of our shortcomings right now is, Smith Falls was a booming business town at one point, right? Tweed's come and gone. Hershey's supposed to be coming back. I think in welcoming newcomers, I think we need to be recruiting business to the community and filling some of our empty spaces and creating more economic growth and employment opportunities for people to come. And then they might then be on board with bringing in newcomers and providing housing and transportation. Continental Mushroom is a great example of a small little town that has a small little business that buses people in from Ottawa to and from work every day. Wow. Right? They have their own school bus.
And that they have a responsibility to provide for the needs. Like, we do not have secure housing here for those of us who are here, never mind others. And if that concept can be transferred to add to that, and our community can become more aware, then we have a better system that works for everybody.
Well, and to Sean's point, I think so Hershey's will be starting to hire probably later this year and be another year probably before they're fully operational. But they're going to need a workforce, and so that's
they have to have housing.
Well, that becomes So I think it's a matter of maybe connecting with them early on, having further conversations with them early on to try and help prepare for fill their needs, but also the needs of the community, right? Who's the other hand up?
I just wondered if there was a group that was looking at, that was formed to bring in the Ukrainian folks. Was there a group?
Yeah, there was, and it was really probably about a dozen people, plus some additional volunteers. And it sort of, they wrapped up their efforts for the most part. They have a wrap up sort of potluck on Saturday for those that are involved. And they've taken the balance of the money to be raised and distributed to the Ukrainians in appropriate fashion. So, but the model, I was involved with that group, so very familiar with the model, how it works. So I agree, that's something that we could build around and build upon to try and take it broader. But the working group that we've had from this, as you know, we haven't had much chance to, we only met once, but the purpose really is to fulfill that objective, say how do we take that and expand it broader and recruit people. And then so we've talked about having an open house or a community dinner. Meetrick suggested whether it's a breakfast or whatever, but I think that's a good first step. We would welcome newcomers and hold an open house and welcome anyone who's newer to our community to come out, whether they are someone who's moved here from Toronto and born in Canada or someone who come recently from somewhere else in the world. Peter?
Yeah, so for me, looking at it from a higher level, I think there's maybe two streams of work. One is getting our community, improving, as Chris points out, the readiness of our community and the ongoing discussion about anti-racism and discrimination, helping our population know why it's not on, and education or whatever that is. And then the other stream is the welcoming of the newcomers. So if we did one, because we have limited resources, time, if we did one initiative under one stream and like you suggested, a monthly potluck or something for any newcomer that is in the area, or for anybody who's been here for a long time and doesn't know people, or something. But just to keep it, one, we're always going to focus on education and moving our community forward, and two, welcoming people to us. And for me, I just like boxes, so one initiative or two, and not try to do everything as we can.
How do we find out who's here?
Broad invite, I guess, and hope they turn up or contact us, right? And we could do some outreach through the town's communications department to one, if we host an event to welcome people to it, or even just for newcomers if they want to get onto a mailing list or to identify themselves, so we could do some outreach and try different things.
And the library.
Do some outreach first and then plan for an event.
Yeah.
Sherry?
Good question. So I'm really obviously supportive and intrigued by making our our community more welcoming and people wanting to come here. But I guess I'm sort of looking at it from my perspective in healthcare at a grassroots level. What do we do to ensure the same things for the people that we've got living here currently that don't have that as well? Like, I think it has to be in conjunction. We can put our efforts with immigration and welcoming people to come, newcomers, but at the same time, we still have to be aware that we do, there is the lack of employment unless, if you're in healthcare, there's lots of jobs. But again, we can't even, I guess I'm just sort of looking at it from both sides. Like, I feel we have to do it all, which I know is a lot, but we can't have people here that are struggling, that don't have a place to live and food to put on their table, and put all our time and energy into welcoming newcomers. That to me doesn't make any sense.
I think to the balance, and I absolutely support what you're saying, Sherry, is that it doesn't mean we don't have a responsibility still. Right. If newcomers come, we don't say, oh, sorry, we're not ready.
Oh, no.
But, right, and I don't mean that I mean in general. However, for those residents to be more open to having let me start with Indigenous persons and or newcomers come, we have to show that we're caring for everybody. And that's the big point. And Sean, maybe you can help me with this, because there are recent changes, especially with trauma informed, which many people have trauma issues now. where they're looking at new ways of providing mental health care for our community, which we had a lot, and this was a word after COVID, of an explosion of what already existed in mental health and addictions, but an approach where, police are working with providers who are trained for those needs. And that is gonna be a really wonderful thing, I think, when we do that.
So we, right now, the Smith Falls Police have 4 MCERT workers.
And what does that mean?
So mental health crisis response team.
Okay.
So it's through Lanark County Mental Health. They work with us, but not for us. So the big challenge with what we deal with is this label on our chest when somebody is already in crisis can be an obstacle. So having somebody come with us who isn't the police helps break that initial barrier down. And they've got skills, training, knowledge, and ability that we don't have, right? So they're able to address that crisis on a more immediate term. And then we then are able to focus on more of the other things that are going on in the community. So it's great that they work with us. The mayor has been working with the province, from what I understand, with trying to expand some funding. Our chief is working with other organizations to expand the funding. Acting chief is Jody Emmy. Okay, so she's in an acting role for a 6-month period until a determination is made. So, but there's people working very hard to grow that relationship so that we can have more staff, so that we can address more of the needs of the community. COVID has seen an explosion of mental health. Knowledge and marketing and breaking down some of the barriers has shown more people to come forward, right? Be more open to talk. So there's a crisis and we need to address it. So there's a lot of work being done to try to do so.
And I think, just for what it's worth, it's important never to forget that we all have mental health, and that at any time we can have an unexpected crisis. But the other piece to this is there's much more to our story. We bring many things of qualifications, skills, experiences that have to be equally never forgotten about.
And yeah, the responsibility goes well beyond this committee. So to just build on Sean's comments, so the town, there's a municipal conference coming up a week after next, and the town has delegations with currently 3 different ministries, but 2 that speak specifically to the work of this group. So we have a delegation with a parliamentary assistant to the Minister of Children, Community and Social Services to speak specifically about ODSP and OW rates, and to essentially try to share the experiences within our own community. And in preparation for this, we've sort of confirmed what we had long suspected. In Smith Falls, there are 1,000 individuals receiving ODSP, representing 1,400 people altogether, counting children. Probably another 600 to 700 on OW. So roughly 20% of our population who is living in very deep poverty as a result of limitations imposed upon them by the provincial support programs. So we've been doing a lot of work in building our narrative in preparation for that delegation. And the delegation hopes us to start a conversation. So we know that too many people in our community are struggling. We know we have to do something about it. And we don't expect an answer that week, but we expect the opportunity to continue the narrative until essentially we get what we believe our community needs.
Well, that includes
pardon?
universal basic income, Sean?
Well, we can talk about a number of things with the province. I'm not sure they're receptive to that at this stage, but let's come up again on the agenda here in a moment. The second one we were fortunate to get a delegation with the Minister of Health, and I know she's extremely busy, so we're very fortunate to have it. And there are 3 topics we want to discuss. One is support for the mental health crisis response team, or mobile crisis response team, whatever we want to call it. Understanding that 2 things. One, there's not enough funding to provide the volume of staffing needed to meet the needs. And secondly, the funding is annual grant based right now. So Lanark County Mental Health employs these workers, and they don't find out till later in the year if they even get the grant to even pay it. So, I mean, they're taking some risk in trying to keep this program going. So we're asking for the funding to be permanent, and we're asking to be increased. And all we need is about 1.1 million a year to take that to the next level and make it permanent, and expand the opportunity to support the police service need. Because and Sean can speak to this better than I can, but the evidence is very clear. Having them at the time of crisis, having that support is reducing the needs for the police to do the work. It's reducing apprehensions. It's reducing people taken to hospital. It's reducing the time taken to hospital. And it's leading to much better outcomes. It's leading to referrals to Lander County Mental Health where they can get some support. So we need the funding for that. Second piece, we understood about 2.5 years ago that it was probable that Lander County Mental Health was significantly underfunded in comparison to other mental health agencies across the province. And the numbers we've been given recently by Lander County Mental Health sort of confirm that. And so we're seeking for expanded funding for Lander County Mental Health because its ability to meet the needs of the community are very limited. They're dealing primarily with crisis situations because they just don't have the resources. And the third piece is funding for addiction treatment, including withdrawal, inpatient withdrawal. And we know that it's an issue everywhere. It's an issue in Leonard County, and it's a profound issue in our community. And anybody who's dealing with addiction and substance use, and again, Sean, appreciate any comments here because you're on the front lines. There's no access to treatment. Virtually no access to treatment. There's I think a 2-year wait in Kingston, to my understanding. There's 2,000 people on the wait list, and as I understand it, if you're ready to go for treatment, you need to be able to go now. And if you don't have access, it's generally not the best outcomes. So we believe there's a potential solution available with a couple of different agencies and even a location for inpatient treatment. So we want to advocate for that. So council and the town is very committed to try and help move this agenda forward and try to make our town obviously more inclusive and a place for all. And we want to support everybody. We don't expect outcomes immediately, but we want to advocate because we really believe our citizens need it.
And that's including domestic violence, which is beyond an epidemic and has been for some time, right?
Aaron Lee and her team at Interval House is a wonderful resource that we have that charges forward on a daily basis to spread that message and make sure that it's known that it is an epidemic. So she's a great partner.
I think there's about 90 municipalities representing 70% of Ontario's population that have now declared intimate partner violence as an epidemic. And that started in Leonard County.
In terms of the strategic priorities and stuff, we were given this, and I was wondering if I'm maybe missing something as to why it's not been brought up, the ideas of how to particularly direct this committee. Wouldn't it make sense to follow what's been already put down in a strategic plan from 2023 to 2026 to see what we can do that's, so in two ways, how this committee can assist with stuff that's already in to meet the strategies already in the strategic plan, how we can assist with that to make sure that the decisions that are being made are for everyone in mind, and meets what collectively we would hope to losing my train of thought. I'm just going to start on the next one. And then the other one is how we can shape what this committee is thinking about independently of the strategic plan, how we can make sure that what we are doing is toward the things that we're measuring inside this, because something that I read in this is that you want to make sure that you're able to track what's being done, how to measure it, how to make sure that we're progressing in the direction that we want to. Are there ways that what we are doing can be included in that at the same time as the stuff that's already going to be happening, whether or not we're involved, to see if there's ways that we can assist with those to make sure that the decisions are being made with the kind of inclusiveness that we would collectively want to see. I remember having this and I was like, well, you know, if we're talking about strategy, this might be a good place to start because we've already got one. Those are my thoughts.
Well, a great point. Aligning the priorities of this group with the town's strategic priority for this term.
I think that it's just not inclusive enough, Gwen, in my opinion. My
Yeah.
apologies. And that so many of the crises that are going on that have not been talked about, if we don't do something aligning with meeting those strategy goals, we're gonna have such a problem on top of the explosion we already have that it's just gonna be, it's already impossible to catch up. But like, for example, the task force recommendations, we have to find a way to bring things in alignment, I think, including what you've suggested, which is a really good thing. But those things are not included, as far as I know, in that strategic plan as it is now.
Some are.
So that's good. So that's where we can match, right?
It's
But
also a
then there are some
challenge.
that could be added.
But it's also a challenge to try to bring to that many voices. Right, so I sit on another, it's called the situation table. There wouldn't be enough space in this room for everybody within that organization to address the problems we have, right? So the great thing about them, which I think we're doing here too, is it's a collaborative approach to providing care. So somebody is brought forward, whether it's an individual or a family, and there's about 63 people sitting on that committee. And the presentation is done, and the resources that are required for that individual problem get addressed instead of the separate entities helping people on an individual basis without having any communication. So it's bringing teams together.
I
So
think
hopefully
that
we
that
can bring
talks
teams
about
together.
inclusion, but it's leaving a lot of the stakeholders, consumers out who need to be present. And we have to make sure that that particular type of group, if we don't bring everybody to the table, then we are not doing consensus and consultation. And we're gonna lose something for those who are not in a privileged position.
Well, I get, Sean, it's not really a matter, it's certain situations that come to that table that are brought forward by any of the organizations that are part of it, right? So it is very broad. I don't sit on, I've never been to a meeting, but I think it's more, the concept helps lead to better outcomes.
My thing is are the majority of the individuals involved in that in privileged positions versus representing truly our community, which you just outlined.
I think they're probably, Sean can speak, they're probably more on the vulnerable end. So they're not coming from,
Sorry.
they probably come from more from a vulnerable situation than a position of
People that are brought forward would definitely be the vulnerable ones in need and in crisis or what have you. It's a collaborative approach to providing resources.
Right.
So there's too many silos working individually, not communicating. And what this is doing is trying to break down those barriers and
Right.
providing.
But you know, I've never heard of it and I'm on this committee. That's what's frightening.
This is separate.
Yeah,
this is
nothing to do
this
with
is
that.
separate from that one. I'm just saying,
Okay.
like, there's
Whole different
opportunities work the
mandate,
same.
Yeah, I just want to add to that, just so you're aware. It's about a collaborative approach of professionals that can actually act on the issues at hand, that have the power. Unfortunately, I don't think they're positions of privilege, but they are positions of being able to act and help that person in need, to really act on helping, because they've got, I know Sam Davidson, so she works for Rideau Community, so she's part of our health promotion team. So she's able to say, yes, let's bring this individual into our clinic and offer them the supports they need. That's sort of the focus of that particular group.
Unfortunately, that means we're not inclusive.
Well, I have to stop the conversation there because I do have another meeting at 10:30. We have to wrap things up, unfortunately. And it's one I can't miss. But so I think, Carrie, if you can send out an email to everybody, and I just want to have everyone think about the strengths of our community, the weaknesses and the gaps in what we're trying to do, the opportunities that we can take advantage of, and the threats if we don't act. So and then everyone can provide some feedback. We have a broader discussion on this at our next meeting. And then the basic income resolutions of support. Again, we don't have time to go through this today. We did receive some examples, And the same thing, I think, there's other examples out there. Napanee, I think, is a good one. So what we can do is circulate some of the resolutions that have been supported across the province. And there's a list there that Rob had provided. And then people have a chance to look at it before our next meeting. Our next meeting, I'd like to have a collaboration on coming up with one resolution that we can all support.
The meeting on the 29th.
Yes. And so on the January 29th at 25 Johnson Street, Health Unit, 7 o'clock to 8:30 p.m. is Basic Income 101. And so if you want to learn more about it, there's a great opportunity to attend that session.
And I believe that's a Monday.
Yes. So with that, I'm going to ask for a motion for adjournment, and we have a next meeting date?
February 8th, but you mentioned you were going to be away.
Yeah. So if someone else wants to chair, and I'll see, I might be able to participate from a distance. We'll see.
February 8th, I'll have to politely decline. I've
Okay.
got on training that day and I've got surgery the following day. So.
Okay. Okay, so motion for adjournment, please. Moved by Katie, seconded by Glenn. All in favor? Thank you, everyone, for your incredible effort today.
Are we going to keep this as a priority issue for next meeting?
Yeah.
I'm not here,
So
but
hopefully we have a chance to.